Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. It's hot takes, let's get into it. The obsession with young talents and valuing their future projections more than their current capabilities is ruining the league, both in inflating young players' contracts and in turn all players' contracts, as well as their egos. Well, first things first, I don't really think there's anything wrong with people getting paid more money when they are worth it. The NBA players are the ones bringing the value to the NBA, so it only makes sense that they get a large share of that value. That's how it should be. In fact, the NBA and sports leagues are among the top of the world in terms of like actual fair compensation for its employees in terms of the value that they generate. I do agree that perhaps young players will get contracts that they haven't necessarily quote unquote earned just because they're young and that potential is a thing, but like I don't know what's the franchise's job to do, you know? Oftentimes that gamble does pay off, oftentimes it doesn't, but most teams are going to be put in the position to take that risk just because the NBA is constantly an arms race, and if you manage to land a guy who in 2 years is well exceeding the value of that contract, then you have just done a great job being a GM. But at the same time, if that contract is handed out and that player absolutely sucks and you're stuck with a bad contract, then you did a bad job as a GM. Unfortunately, there's always a little bit of a gambling aspect to this sort of thing. But as far as I'm concerned, young players getting paid is not a bad thing. And in terms of players' egos, man, athletes are always going to be egotistical, whether they're making 15 million or 20. And the difference between that amount of money, by the way, in terms of how it affects their daily life, in terms of how it affects how they act, it's really not that significant. The difference between being worth $100 million and $130 million, unless you just spend ridiculously, the only difference is $30 extra million in your bank account. Otherwise, nothing is different in terms of general lifestyle. No, I think this is taking too critical of a look at the players when, if anything, players should be making more money because they are the ones generating that value. Trust me, I'm not out here making videos on owners because I like to get the value. Cat has the offensive talent to be the #1 offensive option on a contender. I'm going to, I disagree. I do and I don't. See, there's a line between talent and the mentality that you have to have, the wiring to really be an effective first option. In terms of skill set, in terms of ways to put the ball in the basket, Karl Anthony Towns is one of the most gifted offensive fives the game has ever seen. But he does not really have the killer approach that you need in order to be a super effective #1 championship level scorer. And I don't mean this any cliche like Mamba mentality shit. I mean quite literally, you need to have the balls to do more than Karl Anthony Towns does to be a #1 championship option. And he just doesn't. You know, in the past, he's displayed putting up pretty good numbers. I think like 26 and 14 one year. But overall, he ends up backing down when the pressure is on. And you can have all the skills you want in the world, but if you're not actually going to call upon them, if you're not actually going to use them, then guess what? Not much is going to come of it. So yeah, I think Cat has the skills to be a #1 option, but he does not have the mentality to be a #1 option. And that's an important part of it. I don't know if it's a hot take, but it frustrates me whenever I see it. The idea that the Warriors got KD solely to beat LeBron is asinine. Not only did the Warriors beat the Cavs the year before, but the rumors that they were interested were out there way before they blew a 3-1 lead. There's a lot of revisionist history about Kevin Durant's time in the Warriors, and I honestly don't understand why. First of all, it's been treated as though he left the Warriors just simply because Draymond Green yelled at him, when it was kind of just in the air the whole time that he was only going to stay with the Warriors for a couple of years. Like, that was pretty well understood, well established. That's not a decision that any remotely rational person makes based off someone yelling at them once. But they got him to beat LeBron. My guy, any team in the league that could have signed Kevin Durant was gonna do it. They sure were interested in Kevin Durant, and sure, it would help them beat LeBron, but but who wasn't interested in Kevin Durant? Who wasn't interested in beating LeBron? They didn't do it because they weren't capable. They did it because it made it to where they didn't have to worry about whether they were capable anymore. They just obviously were. But not just for that reason, just because being that good is the target of any NBA franchise when creating a team. You want to make as good of a team as is conceivably possible, execute with that team, and fucking win. So, yeah, it's silly to suggest they did it just because LeBron was their biggest opponent, but they were just trying to beat whoever their opponent was, whoever that may be. And not only that, with Kevin Durant, the team that proved to bother the Warriors most, the team that they actually really had to seek out to beat, was the Houston Rockets, not LeBron James and the Cavs. AD is too injury prone and inconsistent to be a top 10 player. I can give you inconsistent. The way I view injury stuff is in terms of valuing a player as a franchise, injuries come into play, but in terms of how I'm labeling you as a player, if you play like a top 10 talent in the league, when you play and you play enough, you play as much as AD does, which is definitely enough, as much as you'd like it to be more, then you just are a top 10 level talent. And I'm not going to say injuries knock you off that spot. It might make me, I might rather have the 12th best player in the NBA than AD as like the 9th, just because the 12th best player will be more available. But ultimately, I want, in terms of actual evaluating talent, AD is a top 10 player in the league. Now, his inconsistency on offense can be rather frustrating, but he's been more positive than negative lately. I definitely think there was a conversation for him falling outside of the top 10 before, but after this year, not so much. All right, so this next take, I could not find the tweet. I wrote it down as what the title of the video would be when I saw it and forgot to screenshot it, and then I dug around forever to find it, but I couldn't. But I promise you the take existed, that or I'm being gaslit. Either way, the take of this video is Dame is staying in Portland. The title and thumb might actually change later, so if this was pointless, then it is what it is. But Dame staying in Portland, you know, I do understand why some people have had this perspective, and I do feel as though in part what Portland is doing by denying him the trade initially is in hopes that maybe he would change his mind. But I just don't get why they would operate in that fashion. Like, even whatever assets they're going to get from a Miami Heat trade, I do think they're better off trading him, taking those assets and Scoot Henderson and moving in a new direction. Obviously, losing a player of Damian Lillard's talent is not a fun thing, but ultimately a worthwhile thing in this case. So no, I don't think he's going to stay in Portland for what it's worth, but it certainly feels like Portland's trying to make it happen, which I do not understand. Nikola Jokic will end up higher than Kevin Durant all time. You know, maybe this is a radical take, but I don't think it's that ridiculous to put Jokic over Kevin Durant all time right now. Kevin Durant doesn't have a championship run that's even remotely as impressive as the one that Jokic just had. I don't really value Kevin Durant's 2 rings all that significantly in terms of where he is placed all time. Really, I look at championships as they come in their own context, and like a championship like Dirk's 2011 ring, for example, is worth so much more than 2 Golden State Warriors rings for Kevin Durant. So with that in mind, a championship run from Jokic I find far more impressive than both of Durant's rings. Jokic has 2 MVPs to Durant's 1. Obviously, Durant has much higher scoring totals all time, but I don't even believe that Kevin Durant is that significantly better of a scorer than a peak Nikola Jokic. If you're just looking at production and efficiency, it's really not like skewed one way or the other in any significant degree. Like Jokic has had seasons where he put up 27 on like plus 12 true shooting. Kevin Durant won multiple scoring titles, put up 30 plus multiple times. He's definitely a better scorer than Jokic, but not by enough of a degree to make up for the playmaking difference, the rebounding difference, and at this point, I'll say it, the defensive difference. Kevin Durant at his best defensively was probably no better than Nikola Jokic at his best defensively this previous year, and assuming he maintains that level of defense throughout the rest of his career, give it 3 seasons, and I think Jokic will confidently be higher than Kevin Durant, unless Kevin Durant, of course, does something within the next few seasons to elevate his legacy. But at least as it stands right now, Jokic is probably right next next to Kevin Durant in terms of all-time ranking, with it being just right around the corner when he would truly surpass him, and that would become the common consensus take. Kevin Durant is overrated in general and all time, and I might make a video about it one day, but not today. The Suns do not move me. No defense at all and literally zero depth. Sure, there will be nights where Beal booked KD combined for 85 points on 65% shooting, but if shots don't fall, which will happen, they are finished. Not to mention zero depth means wearing down over the season. That's especially bad for Kevin Durant. Yeah, I pretty much agree with your evaluation across the board here. I do think, as you mentioned, there will be games where that big three puts up insane scoring numbers and, you know, no one can beat them as a result of that. But when it comes to winning a championship, when it comes to making a deep playoff run, you win those games in the margins, not just on pure talent, not just on pure bucket getting ability. And if your all around game outside of just putting the ball in the basket in an isolation is weak, which in the case of the Phoenix Suns, it is. I don't think their rebounding is very strong. Their defense is definitely not very strong. As you previously mentioned, the depth is definitely not very strong. Well, I do think they did do a decent job of finding a couple of guys who could genuinely be rotation players. Ultimately, they're not like a deep team at the end of the day. They might have like a genuine 7-man rotation, if I'm being generous. So yeah, no, I don't feel very strongly about Phoenix in a positive way. I understand that that's a lot of talent, but so many people chalk this game up to be as simple as just whoever has the most talent wins. But we've seen time and time again that that is not really true. I would argue that the Lakers this previous season were more talented than the Denver Nuggets as a whole, and they got fucking swept. Talent is not as important. Well, it might be as important, but other things are important, like roster construction, like an offensive system, which the Suns did not run really with Booker and Durant. It was just ISO ball constantly. I don't know that Bradley Beal's addition is going to make that any better. I just don't like the Suns. I don't think highly of them. It's not like a personal thing. I've actually really grown to like Devin Booker specifically as a player, just because of how impressive he was in this year's playoffs. And I've actually, low-key secret here, I actually really like DeAndre Ayton. Even though he consistently disappoints, I've always been a fan of what he could be, so I therefore root for him. Bradley Beal's cool. You guys know how I feel about Kevin Durant. I just said it a second ago. But yeah, I just don't love the Suns. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.